Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, where your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Gemma Burgess about what it means to create an authentic workplace for today's employees. Gemma Burgess, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm super excited to have a nice conversation. We're going to be discussing what it means to create an authentic workplace for today's employees. I'm south of Salt Lake City. Where are you joining us from today, Gemma?
Chicago, downtown Chicago today, in a very empty office.
Yeah. I love Chicago, and downtown is beautiful, so I'm a little envious. As we get started, I just wanted to share Gemma's bio with everybody. Gemma Burgess is Chief Executive Officer of Ferguson Partners and leads Ferguson Partners Global Business. Based in the firm's New York office, Gemma is actively involved in the firm's executive and board search practice and works closely with private equity, investment management, real estate, investment trust, structured finance, hedge fund, and investment banking clients. A huge advocate for diversity across the industry, Gemma has consistently placed gender diverse candidates at a rate of 50%. No easy task within an industry that was slow to take on the initiative. A regular speaker and writer on the topic, she is now turning her attentions to the Ethnic Diversity Challenge. Relocated from the London office more than 8 years ago, Gemma possesses a deep understanding of the international markets and the global flow of both institutional and non-institutional capital in the real estate industry. Prior to joining Ferguson Partners in 2007, she spent 2 years at Hanson Green working on non-executive appointments and 2 years at Ramsey Hall working as a generalist within executive search. What a tremendous background. A pleasure again to have you. Anything else you would like to share with me or my listeners before we dive on into the conversation?
No, I think you did a great job. Thanks, John.
Okay, well, wonderful. So let's start with framing up the topic for today. We're going to be discussing what it means to create an authentic workplace for today's employees. And perhaps we should start by talking about authentic, what we mean by authentic and why that is important to people today.
Yeah, and it's a term that seems to be in more regular vocab and dialogue these days, which is great to hear. People ask me this all the time, like, what is it to create an authentic workplace? And the simplest way that I can put it is to create an environment, a culture where everyone can turn up as their true selves, that they're not pretending to be someone else or something else to fit in with the status quo. So I think it's sort of embracing the differences of all of us and allowing people to show up as the same person in the office as they are at home.
Yeah, that might seem like an obvious no-brainer, like, duh, of course we should be doing that. But that's not traditionally how businesses have worked. Traditionally, at least my experience has been, and the experience of many I've talked to, that you're expected to show up and be quote unquote professional at work, and that you check your emotions at the door. Any of the stuff that's going on in your home life, in your social life, any of that stuff, just leave it behind, come to work, do your work. And then you can deal with that when you leave. And the reality is that just doesn't work for us. For most people have complex integrated lives. And if you're trying to bring your whole self to the workplace and really bring your passions and your energies and everything to the work that you do to be creative and innovative, it's a package deal. And I know that means it's more messy, and organizations and leaders sometimes want to mitigate the messiness as much as possible, but it's just the reality. And I think before the pandemic, many individuals just accepted that for the way it is. That's just the way I have to live my life and how my work life is going to be. But over the last couple of years, people have reassessed and they've realized, no, that's actually not the way it needs to be. That was unhealthy. That wasn't sustainable. And people, as they've taken stock and really paid attention to their values and reprioritized, they've decided they're not going to put up with that anymore. And so that's a big driver behind the Great Resignation, the Great Reevaluation. And ultimately, we have to find ways as leaders and within organizations to create a truly authentic workplace. Yeah. How do we go about doing that?
Yes, and it boils down to trying to create an environment and a culture where people live without fear. The reason why people have historically tried to fit in is because they didn't want to be held back for not being considered for promotions. They wanted to they wanted to replicate the behaviors and the interests of people they saw around them. And I think this is true, even back, 15 years ago when I joined the industry. I didn't go to an Ivy League college, and I certainly didn't have a family that were within real estate. And I kept my personal life very secret from the industry for a very long time. And it was only recently, at a conference where I was a speaker that I sort of, shared with folks like my own personal background and journey. And I literally probably had like 200 people reach out to me afterwards and just say, like, this is so interesting. How have we never known this about you? We've known you for 15 years. And it's because fear of not being able to be accepted or to be able to progress in an industry that has historically been very closed to folks from outside of the real estate industry. But I think that fear is hopefully evaporating, and leaders across the industry are truly encouraging their folks to turn up as their authentic self. And I think there's a lot of colleagues across the industry that want to be great allies for individuals that do show up as their authentic self. And I think those are the two things that are key, is that there's got to be the right encouragement from leadership, and there's got to be the right support from the colleagues across a company to give people the confidence that they can be their authentic self, and that there will not be any negative effect upon their career by doing so.
Yeah. That's a tricky thing. I'm a straight cisgender white dude. And so I got the layers of privilege in my favor when it comes to just navigating career development and growth. But you think about how you're going to navigate if you're a female or a woman of color, or, someone who identifies as LGBTQIA plus, or whatever the category is. And all of a sudden it becomes infinitely more complex and challenging. And I think about, I have a large family. I have 6 children. I take that back. It's come up one time in one job search where someone, said I'm too much of a family man. But other than that, it's never been an issue. It's never been an issue. No one's ever noticed or cared. But I guarantee you it's come up for my wife. And as she's tried to navigate, and so people, you either set up this dynamic where people have to hide who they are and key aspects of their life, or you create an environment where everyone is needed, wanted, valued, given the opportunity to contribute, to bring their whole selves to work. And we value the differences among us, and we recognize how that's going to drive better thinking and innovation in our teams. And that's just one little example, right? But there's just so many of those around us. And so like you said, we have to create that safe space. And, I think a lot about psychological safety in the workplace and how we go about establishing that. And it really does come back to vulnerability and authenticity. If we don't have an atmosphere where people can be appropriately vulnerable with each other, where they can be authentic. There's not going to be trust that's built over time, and people are going to put on a mask when they show up to work, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and it's tricky, right? Because if you are in a workforce that is not very diverse to begin with, and you sort of look around the room and there's not other folks being their authentic self that looks different to sort of the status quo, then that can be a challenge. So obviously, arm in arm with sort of building authenticity and finding allies across the industry, we've also just got to continue the good work to make our industry as diverse as it possibly can be. And I think that's diverse with regard to, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual preference, all of those things that you mentioned, John. But I also think it has to be a little bit about bringing different mindsets to work. And I think socioeconomic diversity is a massive piece that we can all do a lot with respect to across the industry. Hiring out of community colleges, setting up internships with local community colleges, like getting the real estate industry out to folks that have never thought of it, heard of it, I think is a big piece of this for us as an industry, to build a pipeline of people that are Black and brown, but also of folks that don't know what it's like to grow up with money in the bank and security over their heads. And to me, this is a big piece that I think will hopefully continue to be a conversation in the boardrooms of our industry, because I think it's important to add socioeconomic diversity as well as all of the other pieces that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and in addition to socioeconomic, as we think about just different forms of cognitive diversity and yes, just so many different things, right? The point is not to just have a big long checklist of let's make sure we have every single person, we have someone represented from every single thing. That's not the point, and that becomes a game that isn't productive. But if we have a mindset in our organization truly towards, a value of diversity, then that will go a really long way in making sure that we're being more fair and equitable in our hiring processes and our promoting of individuals and giving access to resources and all of those sorts of things. And again, I think the two go hand in hand. When we focus on DEI stuff and creating a culture of belonging within the workplace, I think that goes hand in hand with creating a workplace that's more authentic, where people can be their true authentic self and bring who they are to the work that they do. Maybe we're taking it for granted here, but perhaps for a few minutes we need to just address why does this matter? Why is it important to create an authentic workplace for today's employees? Why do millennial and Gen Z individuals in the workforce need this as a key component to their employee experience?
Why do they need this, and why do they need this now, I guess, are the two questions that I would sort of ask. And I think whilst, COVID had many of us locked away for a very long time, we are now, in a lot of instances, folks are encouraging their team members to come back into the office and spend some time together. And I think as any leader of any organization would say, that having, osmosis and teams being able to collaborate in person is a good thing for their business. That's where the innovation comes from. That's where, opportunity is sought and found within an organization. So now leaders are faced with the situation where they want to get people back in the office. And therefore they've got to make the office an enjoyable place to be. And I think that want and need for people to enjoy being in the office and enjoy spending time with their colleagues, right now after COVID, means that now is a good time, if you haven't done this already, that it's something that will be important to ensure that you can, have folks wanting to be in the office and be together. So that's one piece of it. The timing piece of it, it feels like it's sort of critical now, kind of post-COVID, or can we say post-COVID these days? I'm not quite sure, but at least kind of, post-vaccinations and folks being willing and able to be back in the office together. I think the bigger picture of why is it important? is I truly don't think that we can solve the DE&I issues across our industry unless we first of all solve for authenticity and finding allies across the industry, because it doesn't matter how great you are at recruiting. If you can find diverse folks that can join your organization, that's great. But bigger than that is they've got to really embrace the company, embrace the culture, kind of want to be there. And if you don't, if you don't encourage the authentic self piece, then ultimately they're probably never going to be that happy. Like, we all know what it's like when you're, putting on that mask every day, and it's exhausting for folks when you've got to not only think about getting your job done, but remembering how to, correct an accent or pronounce something in the right way, or not talk about what you're doing over the weekend because of fear of how that will affect your future career. I can only imagine, and I don't know the half of it, I'm sure, like how exhausting that is for an individual. So yeah, I think why now, I think post-COVID, and I think why is it important? Because if we don't fix this, then we truly will never fix the DE&I issues across the industry.
Yeah, and I really think that younger people entering the workforce or who are early in their career, they just demand this kind of an environment. Certainly the DEI conversations, that's just an expectation. That's not like a good to have, like we need to work on this. It's like, it better be this way or I'm not going to work for that company. And in terms of the authenticity, people, younger people, they're not, I mean, I'm generalizing here, of course, but generally speaking, younger people aren't willing to hide their tattoos. They're not willing to, mask their sexuality or their gender expression. They're not willing to do those things. Like, they want to be able to just be who they are and show up to work and then do the work, like do a good work and do a good job and develop themselves, get coached, get mentored, get the training, get the upskilling needed so they can be successful. They want to show up and do the work. They just don't want to have to go through all the layers of pretending and obfuscating, who they truly are. And so if we don't create an authentic workplace environment, we're just going to lose out on good young talent, period. I'm not sure if there's a more nuanced way to view it, honestly. I'm not a very black and white kind of person, but when it comes to this issue, we are already seeing younger people voting with their feet in mass, and they just aren't willing to work with companies that aren't focusing on this.
It's so true. Motivations, values, and preferences are very different today, or for the younger generations, than it has been historically. I think a lot of folks would say they'd much prefer to earn a few less dollars and work at a place where their values and preferences and motivations align with the people around them. And therefore, if you as a leadership team or as an organization, if you are not taking your corporate responsibilities very seriously, and that can be sort of outreach into the local community, that can be donations to charities, it can be any of those things. But if someone doesn't see that there, then they either won't join your company or they'll leave your company. And just the whole kind of ethos about why people go to work and how they go to work has rapidly changed, and I think it will continue to rapidly evolve over the next few years. And again, some of that might be due to COVID, for sure, but I think also some of it is just down to folks having placing an importance on other things more than just money and their role. And therefore, as I say, you've got to create an environment where people can be proud to say that they work at your company, and that they can very publicly, share with their friendship group and their families, etc., kind of what that company stands for. And I don't think even 10 years ago that most folks would have even asked those kind of questions in interviews. But right now, that's kind of top of the list of what people are asking the firms that they're potentially joining.
I feel like I'm kind of a millennial Gen Z at heart. I'm a trailing Gen X. Some people call it the Zennial generation, right, kind of right in between the Gen X and the millennials. Anyways, I'm a university professor, so I'm around younger people all the time, and maybe that's part of it. But I've been telling students for years, as I'm mentoring students and just thinking through career opportunities and development, like when you go interview for a job, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. And that is really the mindset you should have. And depending on the economic outlook and the labor market, that's sometimes a hard thing to stick to if you're kind of desperate for a job and it's hard out there to find work. And I totally get that. But that's not the environment we're in right now. People have options. And even if it's tighter, I still would recommend to people, like, ask those hard questions to the employer, ask to the people who are interviewing you. What is their social mission? What are their core values? How are they demonstrated, and how are those values lived out in the workplace each and every day? Ask those hard questions, because you do not want to be at an organization that you can't mesh with. Organizations talk about fit all the time. They know how important it is. Same thing goes for you, especially early on in your career. If you want to be on a good trajectory and be able to develop yourself, you need to be at a place where you can actually thrive. And more, because of shifting priorities and values of younger people, that kind of the traditional old model organization isn't necessarily the place where they see themselves thriving. And so we either, as organizational leaders, we either need to figure out a way to develop these cultures and environments, the employee experience that is conducive, or we're going to pay the price. Well, Gemma, this has just been a really great conversation. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with my audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Yeah, you can check out our Ferguson Partners website, where all of our contact details are available. Also find us on LinkedIn and other social media. I guess my final sort of words on this topic is, it's kind of okay for firms to throw up their hands here and say they've done a terrible job at this in the past. I think it's okay to ask for help as to how to navigate through some of these topics that might be newer to an organization. I think what's really key is that you communicate what you're doing with your employees, and that you have a very open dialogue about it. Like, measure it, get some metrics, get some stats, and then redo that again on an annual basis. Like, be very public about where you are failing and where there's still opportunity to improve, and what small wins that you've got. Like, celebrate those small wins together. I think that transparency, like owning this piece, is the only way that every firm is going to be able to move forward with regard to this topic. And sometimes this starts with some very difficult conversations. And, if individuals, companies, leaders kind of want help and advice and counsel on this, then reach out to us, because it's obviously very important to us. And I think we've got some great pearls of wisdom that we can share with folks as they navigate through this journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gemma. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage my audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Gemma and her team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing, even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great week.